Yeah, this is your time for questions.
Can you start by just expressing a little bit more on the roadless rule and the Supreme or the?
Yeah, Aaron, thanks for that. That wasn't part of my prepared remarks because we hadn't received the final ruling by the time we completed the remarks. But the Ninth Circuit Court, of which there's a panel of always 3 judges, they don't have all these in lump with all the judges there. And the 3 judges, interestingly enough, there was a Carter judge and a Clinton judge, but they voted 3-0 that Idaho had done the right thing and that Idaho should go forward with its roadless plan.
Is that?
I emphasized up there that by staying at the table and continuing to discuss it and continuing to argue. Remember, Jim Risch, Governor Risch then, put that roadless plan together. And when I got it, and what he did is he went out and gathered a bunch of folks and said, okay, how can we work this thing out? And they sat down together, they worked on it collaboratively. They submitted that plan when I was still in Congress. And we've been fighting to keep it ever since, because the Interior Department, that was the only roadless plan that the federal government had accepted. And so we were fighting to keep it, and other states were wanting to help us so that they could then follow that model. But the fact that we stayed at the table, the fact that we didn't get up and just walk off and say, okay, well, you guys go ahead and do it, I think that was the winning day for us.
They found that, that it was legally sound, so that must be a win for collaborative efforts.
Absolutely. And it's a win for staying at the table when you still have a reason to be there. And so we've done that same thing now with sage grouse. We did that with the wolves. We did that with the caribou. The caribou, a lot of that information out of northern Idaho didn't get out here. I think a week or 2 weeks ago, we got a ruling on the caribou critical habitat. They wanted 375,000 acres for those 4 caribou up there. And what we ended up with was 6,000 acres in Idaho. A total of 30,000, but only 6,000 of it in Idaho.
Governor, you mentioned caribou. Made me think of Caribou County, which made me think that I'm reminded that Caribou County, 42% of its budget is comes from the personal property tax.
Right.
What do you expect that to be your toughest fight with the?
Well, as I said the other day in the AP, if you remember when that came up, how are we going to go forward? And I said, do no harm. Whatever we do, let's make it as painless as possible. And Caribou County's one. If you look at Power County, they're over 30% of their budget. Some of the larger counties with the larger private property tax rates don't have, the same level of dependence on personal property. But that's why, I've suggested, in general, let's take a look at local option taxes.
Governor Otter, local tax, or local option tax rather, that would be a tax shift onto a lot of the personal property owners. Do those counties have on property? Sorry, not personal properties, but property owners.
No. That's not necessarily so.
And do those counties and areas have a tax base for local option that would replace that amount of money in the budget?
Well, I don't know, but I know that ever since I've been in the legislature, when I was in the legislature back in '73, that was something the folks wanted. And quite frankly, I like it that way. I like it where the same jurisdiction or the same jurisdiction that does the taxing is the same jurisdiction that's responsible for spending. So when you divide up the authority to tax, they're now using our authority to tax, from the responsibility to spend, too many times there's a disconnect there. And so they would have to go to the local folks and say, we want to have a broad-based tax of some kind. And it's not, if somebody read into my comments that it was a sales tax, a local sales tax, that's not true. I did not say sales tax. I said local option tax. And so that could mean a lot of things. And what is it going to mean? I don't know. That's just one of the ideas. There may be other ways. One of the reasons I asked the cities and counties, and have asked the cities and counties for the last 3 years, every one of their annual meetings that I've spoke to, because they have told me, you know, if it weren't for all of these state mandates that you're putting on us, we wouldn't have a lot of this expense that we have. Give me a list of the things you want repealed. I'd be more than happy to champion an effort to repeal all those things you guys don't want to do. So how much could we reduce that $140 million tax level at the local level?
Governor, what other forms of taxation, Idaho only has an experience and only has really debated local option sales taxes, and I apologize, I assume that's what you're talking about, was sales tax. I wrote that already. So I'll change that, but other states have local option income taxes. Is that what you're talking about?
I'm saying, look, I just like the idea of the counties, the county leaders themselves making the case for what they need. So, in the first place, if they got a list of things that they want the legislature to repeal, we are mandating unfunded mandates on them, then let's, to the extent that we can, remove those. How much is that worth? I don't know, 25, 30. Every time you talk about relieving the personal property tax from the people that pay, they say, well, where are we going to get the money for all these state mandates? I'm saying, give me a list of the state mandates. The second thing, I did put a $20 million placeholder in my budget for easing that transition. Should we end up with a program where we're going to phase that out over a few years?
And you mentioned counties specifically with that $20 million and in your student standards, but what about the other taxing districts that are also?
I should have included them all. Anybody that's reliant on the personal property tax, I should have included them.
Income tax, a local option income tax is something
You're not going to get me to say that, Dan.
But it's on the table.
I want the local leaders to make that decision.
But what would the state empower? I mean, you've got to set parameters in the nature of the various ways they can collect tax.
I'm sure completing our discussions, completing my state of the state, we'll start coming up with some ideas. And some of those ideas will be generated at the local level. Because for one county, it might be different than another. But, you know, I'm not excited about a hodgepodge of different taxes for different counties, but they're going to look at what we do to the border counties with the state of Oregon. Every time we increase sales taxes, everybody goes to Ontario to buy a lot of their big item stuff. So, you know, we've got to be careful in our taxing policy, but we've got to be fair in our taxing policy as well. And there's obviously the question comes up is, could that be replaced by the internet sales tax? Should we be able to move into that? Would that replace that? So, you know, there's a lot of ideas out there floating around, and my intent in the state of the state was say, hey, take a look at this.
Governor, you mentioned simplifying the Hire One tax credit. What have been the issues with that, and what would be the new incentives that could be in place with that?
Well, I can't get into the weeds on that, but part of it's the paperwork. Part of it, fundamentally, it doesn't change our intent that if you hire a veteran, these are the certain tax credits that you could give. Well, did we have that on the filing tax form? You know, we had grocery tax credit on there. Did we have tax credit for that? So it'll be some updating of that legislation that passed 2 years ago.
And it'll also be for businesses that hire non-veterans.
Well, the Hire One Act was,
yeah.
But the Hire One Veteran or Hire One Hero, that's different. The Home Act, those will be the same. But my emphasis today was primarily on, look, we thought we had a pretty good system in place, but it is confusing, and we don't want to compound that confusion. And we'll really get a chance to see with their filings by April 15th how many small businesses that hire folks are going to take advantage of that.
Governor, looking into your crystal ball, what do you think will be the toughest issue this session that the legislature will have to grapple with? You know, constitutionally, you'll have to balance the budget, but what do you see as the big issue? I mean, last year it was education, last session it was education. What's your sense?
Well, we didn't grapple on that education students come first any longer than we did the budget. And fundamentally, we made as many or more changes in the budget. As you recall, we had the 35, 35, 35. You know, that was the deal that we finally got out with, which was 35 million, or 31 million in tax relief. And then we backfilled some education stuff with another 38 million or something like that. The balance went for some other things. So the budget is always going to be the going home bill. Always going to be the going home bill. Always going to take up more. Because the budget's the main thing that we do. Sure, undoubtedly, we'll have some give and take. We'll have some take a look around on the insurance exchange. There shouldn't be an awful lot of discussion on Medicaid expansion, because Medicaid expansion, we're not up against a deadline on that. I had to make that decision on the healthcare exchange before the 15th of December, 14th of December. So that was a little different, to at least let them know our intent and keep a hold of the seat at the table.
Governor, 2 years ago, in your speech, you talked about the idea, this is in the middle, you were talking about Obamacare at the time, you know, that you were going to do everything you could to stop it. You said even nullification, considering nullification. And today, you made the point near the end of your speech that, you know, we've got, part of the issue here is that we've got to move forward under the rule of law, even laws that we don't like.
Wow.
Is this a change in heart for you?
No, Rocky, I vetoed that nullification bill
I know.
for one reason. And that reason was that it went far beyond Obamacare. It had the collaborative home effort that we already had, the home care medical thing that we already had, that we had put in place starting back in August of '07 with my healthcare summit. Those were a lot of the ideas came forward, but if you'll recall, when Obamacare came into being, they co-opted a lot of those things. And so if they had been more specific, if we could have designed that bill where it was more specific to things that we weren't already doing, then I would have probably found greater favor with that.
So that you, in other words, your view of the whole issue of nullification and what you said today, you think...
I think we're at a point that barring some legal wizard convincing me otherwise, that the only one that can nullify the Obamacare is the Congress. You know, bear in mind too the environment that we were in, Rocky, when we were working on that. We had a court. Remember, we were doing that in January, February, March, and April, and the court case didn't come down until June. Yeah. In June. Then it was, well, what about the election? In November 6th, if we take over the Senate, the House had already said they'd repeal it, so if we took over the Senate, and not only Mitt Romney, but almost every Republican candidate for the Republican primary nomination had also said they would get rid of Obamacare. Right. So that was the environment that we were operating in then, and all the uncertainty that was added to it.
Governor, following up on the Medicaid issue, studying it for a little while, no decision right now. Do you foresee any circumstances under which you would proceed recommending expanding Medicaid?
No, I don't, Don. But I don't see anywhere I wouldn't, where I would or I wouldn't. But I think fundamentally we're going to be asking for some changes in Medicaid as we know it. We want to emphasize on the quality of care rather than the quantity of care. That's why I said we want to change from a posture where we're paying the Medicaid supplier, server, for every visit that's there, rather than how effective is that visit. So we want to shift to a point of outcome, but we also want to shift to a point where the patient has to take more responsibility for their, you know, we tried to do that during the Great Recession when we ended up adding a lot of co-pays. And we saw some correction as a result of that. So I think not only in the expansion from 133 to 138 that you're going to see them working on, you're also going to see them working on all that up to 133. And you need to know that there's some other dysfunction in the way that Medicaid expansion has come down. Let me give you an example. Jan Brewer right now is in a court fight with Health and Human Services under Obamacare because she already had it at 138. And they already had mental health in it. So out of the Arizona's generosity, they were already doing a lot of things that Obamacare said, now we have, or the court actually ruled that we have the option of doing, but Obamacare said you've got to do this. So if I add up to 138, I'm a lot better off than Jan Brewer, and there isn't equal treatment under that law for Jan Brewer, who was already very generous in their Medicaid payments, in their Medicaid eligibility. You understand what I'm saying? And the same thing in Nevada. In Nevada, there was a situation where there was absolutely no mental aid, no mental health in Medicaid. And so all of their Medicaid that they're adding now, all the mental health, is paid for in Nevada, where other states that had it, they're just out of luck. So I think that a lot of those things have to be resolved, but like I said, there is no drop dead date. There is no deadline for us on Medicaid.